with Sandy
and Brad.
This is welcome to episode 3. We have a great episode for you. So like and share. Don't forget, we are going to be talking today about the FTC proposed rule to ban non-compete clauses. So Brad.
That's big news. Yeah, that is big news. So in January, this proposed rule came out. President Biden had tasked the FTC, I think last year sometime, with doing something in this vein. And I think everybody's expectation was that we would see something really targeted to protecting those lower level workers, you know, who oftentimes are burdened by non-competes unnecessarily. And then what we got in January of this year was, you know, just the full Monty, right? Absolute prohibition on non-competes for employees, independent contractors, sole proprietors vis-a-vis customer. I mean, it's just, he went to the end of the dock, Chairman Khan did, and you know, it's got a lot of people, well, a lot of strong feelings on all sides of this issue. So we want to unpack that a little bit today. So Sandy, tell me kind of what's your 30,000 foot view on this?
Well, you know, I really kind of thought the same thing. And in here where I am, a few years ago, there were non-competes coming out for workers like housekeeping in hotels. And I just thought to myself, well, that's a little like, you know, you go to the next hotel because they're going to pay you $1 an hour more, right?
You remember the Jimmy John's? There was a famous case because the sandwich maker at Jimmy John's, I think it was a New York case actually, but right, they had to sign a non-compete, so they couldn't go Subway across the street, right, and make the sandwiches, right? And the court said this is ridiculous and threw those out. So
right. So it's things like that I think that sometimes our rulemaking and the laws are very reactionary. So when there's bad players, you know, these kind of things happen. But this, when I read the bullets on this rule, I even wrote next to my notes, OMG, because you know.
Well, and let's get out, let's throw out here early just to kind of dial back the alarm. Right, this is a proposed rule at this point, right? So it's not the law. Non-competes are not illegal at this time. What we have from the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission, it's a U.S. federal agency, is a proposed rule that would prohibit the use of non-competes. It doesn't touch non-solicits. It doesn't touch confidentiality. So you could still use those, you know, generally within reason. But what this does attempt to ban or propose to ban is the non-competes. We've still got a comment period that extends into March. I think it's March 20th is the deadline for public comment.
Which then there's like right?
The public comment is and we're seeing a lot of things, right? And I think the general consensus, at least from the business community, is, well, I mean, they've got issues across the board, but the big one is we need some if something like this is going to go forward, it needs some guardrails, and it needs, right, we need to have exceptions for executive level personnel. We need exceptions for, you know, more highly compensated folks or folks above a certain level, who may have, you know, really the opportunity to take advantage of those legitimate business interests of the employer that want to be protected. And there's just a lot to say, but I want to make clear, this is not the law as of today. And we've got a comment period till March 20th. There's like a 180-day period in which after they publish a proposed final rule, or it would be a final rule, it would be 180 days, at 6 months before it takes effect. And there's going to be a ton of legal challenges in the interim as well. So whether this thing really ever sees the light of day is still a big question mark, and what it looks like in its final form, big question mark. I think that's probably the most important thing we could convey, you know, in the messaging now, is like, because a lot of people are losing their minds right now about, what am I doing? Are my non-competes invalid? No. Status quo for now, but we need to keep a close watch on what's coming.
Right. And, you know, in Brad, in the retail automotive industry, which is where I often work, we're very familiar with the FTC, and just recently went through a lot of rulemaking, and we understand how important this period is where there's public comment available, right?
Yeah.
And now is the time to get, you know, get busy with your organization, get busy with your council,
your group, trade groups and stuff that have that.
It really is important. And, you know, I think that this rule is really, I mean, independent contractors, you know, it's the proposed rule is a lot. It
Yeah.
really, I understand why people are afraid. So it's great that you are saying, hey, okay, this isn't the final, right?
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, we want to sort of sketch out the parameters of what's on the table. But again, the most important point is nothing has changed as of yet. And you know, you mentioned the FTC. You know, that's going to be sort of the crux of one of the legal challenges. Does this organization, does this agency have the authority to impose a rule like this? And we sort of go way down the rabbit hole of like nerdy lawyer stuff about federal versus state, you know, authority and who can really make rules. And we saw some of that with COVID, you might remember, right? The CDC comes out, or other federal agencies come out with rules about mandating employer vaccinations, and those ultimately were halted because it was deemed a lack of authority to make a rule in that manner. That chilled the what was, you know, appearing to be a national mandate for larger employers to require vaccination. So there's a lot of there's going to be a lot of litigation, I think, on whether the FTC has that right. And again, just to take a further step back, non-competes and other restrictive covenants are, you know, have historically been and currently are all creatures of state law. And so they vary from state to state. I know you work with multi-state employers and employers in a variety of states, Sandy. So, right, the law in California, right, which is sort of one extreme where non-competes are already generally not permitted, is, you know, almost 180 degrees different from Florida, where I live and work and practice, where, you know, there are some statutory limits, but generally speaking, non-competes are used pretty far and wide and upheld and enforced by the courts. And then, you know, there's any number of other states sort of in between in terms of the enforceability. And so my point is that, you know, the FTC and the federal agency coming over the top, you know, as FTC is sort of a watchdog for a type of consumer protection and antitrust, right? We don't want monopolies. And they're sort of saying, hey, in the interest of competition, we think a ban on non-competes is appropriate. A lot of people are waving their hands going, I'm not so sure you guys can do that. So that's going to be one of the major legal challenges, I think, that we're going to see to this.
Yeah, I think that that's a great point, because usually, you know, and broadly written non-competes, right? Like I've seen them where, you know, you can't work for anywhere else in the entire country, not in the same business, right? And
Yep.
and you know, I think that the broadly written non-competes, and I've had some, you know, personal experience with people at high levels who have said things to me like, you know what, a non-compete would be a deal breaker in my decision making of accepting a role somewhere, right? Like
Yeah.
if a really big non-compete. So I think that there's two sides to, like there is, or maybe 6 sides to every story, right?
Truth. Yeah.
You know, that employers could do 2 things, right? Really think about what is in your non-compete. How is it written? Is it fair to everyone? And also think about what is your value proposition to retain people, because that's the bottom line of a non-compete, right? Like you don't want your talent to go somewhere else, right? So what can you do internally to create a workplace where people don't want to leave you, right? That it makes it so great. So that's kind of my soapbox these days, as we're in this employment environment where it's hard to find people.
Yeah.
Right? It's a challenge to find people. So Brad, this has been an awesome conversation, and we promised that we were going to touch lightly, and stay tuned because we're going to follow up with another short episode. We have promised to make these episodes short, kind of bite-sized.
A quick take, if you will.
Yes, there we go. But we do need to talk about real quickly the actual rule that is in place now, the NLRB, that is restricting severance agreements that offer a broad confidentiality and anti-disparagement clause,
Yeah.
right?
So the FTC non-compete thing, we'll keep you posted on that, and we will probably have subsequent episodes. I think you're right, though. We do need to touch on this recent NLRB decision that came out the week of February, whatever, 13th or 15th. So very recent, and it is the law now, because that's a decision of the board, which, as Sandy said, pretty clearly prohibits in severance agreements requiring confidentiality of the terms of those agreements, which is a pretty standard term, and prohibiting the use of non-disparagement language, which is also an extremely common term, right? And oftentimes you'll see reciprocal non-disparagement. Hey, we the employer won't disparage you, you employee won't disparage us. And this all emanates out of the National Labor Relations Act and a decision of the National Labor Relations Board. There's a lot to unpack there. I know a lot of employers, I get on the phone with them and talk about the NLRA, and they go, wait a minute, I'm not a unionized workforce. This doesn't have anything to do with me. Not so fast, my friend. There's just a lot going on here, but this is a decision that we need to spend some time with. And so for our next episode, we will, unpack it more thoroughly, but you should be aware severance agreements for employees only, doesn't apply to independent contractors or supervisors or managers, but we'll talk about some of the nuance there. But generally speaking, employees, it's viewed an impairment of their Section 7 rights under the NLRA to include confidentiality or non-disparagement in severance agreements. And that's a game changer for the forms used by most employers, I would think, in the US.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to have a lot of questions for you, Brad, regarding this. Prior agreements, standalone agreements, like how is this going to affect employers in real time? So stay tuned.
Yep.
And don't forget to like and share, and we will see you soon.
Bye-bye.